So good morning from New York and good afternoon in Lagos. I'm happy to join this conversation today, which is a critical part of us trying to survive in this area. Like I told you before, we're living in the time where we have two kind of crises, the COVID pandemic and the climate crisis. So this panel, we're going to look at how to examine the effect of climate change and how our governments, the African government, are responding to this issue. And then, of course, try to do some recommendation how we can move forward. Allow me to introduce our speakers that are on screen. Like I said, we're expecting 2 speakers. I have with me Adenike Akinstemolu, who is the founder of Green Institute. Adenike, it's nice to see you again. Adenike is an advocate and nice to see you. Thank you. I also have with me Olalekan Sapisi. Is that correct?
Sapisi. Anyhow, I'm fine.
The founder of Project Wisdom Livelihoods Initiative. These are 2 people that I am even admiring as well because they are continuing the movement and inspiring and holding government accountable in Nigeria. So these are our panelists. Hopefully we'll be joined by Dr. Wanjiru Kamu Rottenberg, who is the Director of African Women in Agriculture Research Development in Kenya, and Adebola Omololu, CEO of Afriscape. So no continent will be as struck severely by the impact of climate change like Africa. Given our location, our geographic position, and our vulnerability is even more increased because we are affected by poverty and our very limited capacity to adapt to the impact of climate change. So the UN says by 2020, between 75 and 250 million people on the continent are projected to be exposed to the increased water stress due to climate change. The same year, some countries' yield agriculture will reduce by 50%. So this is a picture of what we do now. So I'm going to throw my first question to all of you. My first question to you, Olalekan, is, in your views, give us what is the state of the climate response in the African continent? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Esther. I really appreciate your coordination this morning. Thank you for that very good question. It is interesting to know that I don't want to discredit the African government about their impact, their effort in combating climate change in Africa. However, I think a lot has to be done more than the talking stage. So when the uprising of climate change came in, there was a lot of noise on the media. I think they did reasonably well in the awareness, but in a country such as Nigeria, where I come from, the awareness is main in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, and very big cities. And the elite of our society were the one that are aware about climate change. But what are the efforts of going into the rural areas that is accommodating about 70% of our population in Nigeria? It's about nothing. So I think including the rural population, which is important and strategic to fighting extreme hunger and climate change, is not well positioned in fighting extreme climate change. Also, it is interesting to actually know that when we talk about climate change, it's important to carry our children and the youth. Talking about climate change, we have to instill it as a culture, which I don't think is really happening on our continent in Africa. Also, it is interesting to actually know that our government is not putting intentional effort into fighting climate change. As you said earlier, poverty is something that is huge on our continent. When we talk about this global issue, climate change, and for about 2-3 months down the line, you discover that people are in hunger, then they face the hunger part of it. And also, I think it will be very good for us to incentivize people working in fighting climate change and supporting grassroots organizations to fight climate change. I think this is important to build a resilient network in the grassroots to fight the actual, I will call climate change a pandemic here. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that's quite interesting. You've noted that one of the states, what you find in your views is that the awareness is a bit very limited to mostly urban areas where this elite labor people, and that the rural community that actually is facing the impact of climate change is not carried along. You've also said that we need to invest in education of your children and young people to be able to understand the impact of it, and also address the issue of poverty as well. So I'm going to go to, thank you so much for that. I'm going to go to Adenike. Adenike, how are you? Adenike, I know you are an entrepreneur. You've built capacity of young people. You've been an advocate. You've done so much work. I mean, you look at Africa's youthful population. What other ways do you think climate change can critically affect their future, and what can they do from financing, health, education? So what's it for young people in the continent in terms of what's the future like?
If I get the question right, what's the future of young people in terms of climate change, right?
Yes, with your experience, you've invested in.
Or what's the future of Africa?
Yes, exactly. Just look at African youthful population. What is there for young people? Should they hope for anything at all?
Well, yeah, they should hope for something, because the good thing about the whole world, first of all, is struggling with climate change. So it's not a climate crisis. So it's not just an African thing. And the good thing is that I try not to focus on the negatives, because we can talk about negative all day and nothing is still going to happen. So the thing is, Africa has two major advantages. The continent is endowed with a wealth of natural resources that the rest of the world cannot do without. And secondly, the youngest population is in Africa. So with the growth of youth population comes with high energy, creativity, and talents, which are very crucial when you're managing resources to solve to tackle the challenges of climate crisis. So I think what we need for youth, the future is there, but what we need for youth is education, and more education. And I'm not just talking about the traditional education. I'm talking about sustainability education. Education being the root of every revolution. A lot of our youths would need to be enlightened. They need to be equipped, and they need to be empowered to confront the challenges that confronts them. So, for instance, in Nigeria and maybe other parts of Nigeria, our academic curriculum does not emphasize on sustainability issues that can combat climate crisis. At the very best, the science is taught or explained in isolation or hypothetically. So the effect of that is that we end up with graduates who cannot tackle they are inept to tackling the global challenges. So with initiatives that educate young people more, I hope to see like a geometric, so if we can educate young people on sustainability, and if we can empower them to be climate resilient, we can empower them to be more ethical and even more entrepreneurial young leaders, then hopefully we'll see a geometric increase in the number of, not just educated individuals from early childhood education to adult education. So we're not saying talk about climate change from maybe university, or if you're just in the sciences, the curriculum should be incorporated right from secondary school or even from elementary school. And we're doing that. My hope is that in the next 10 years from now, the future is bright. We have natural resources. We have a lot of our young people that are going out of the country. And hopefully, if there's an enabling environment, maybe they want to come back. And the ones that don't want to come back, maybe they can do something from where they are. And so 10 years from now, we'll be seeing, I see an Africa that will be seeing like more resilient individuals whose education becomes a weapon of offense and defense against the hydra-headed nature of climate crisis. And like you said, climate crisis is a youth issue. So an enabling environment is very critical for the youth to thrive and also to become active players and be at the front of sustainability.
I'm just going to go back to what you said about investing in education, right? In terms of really deliberately investing in education, build capacity, and also train the young people to live in the current future that they have now. So if you happen to meet a minister now, let's say Minister of Environment, like looking at Nigeria as a context, we have Minister of Education, Minister of Environment. What would you tell these two people as government representative in terms of this context now that you invest in education? How would you do that? But how will you explain to them that education, which is one minister is dealing, and climate, which is what another minister is doing, working together can really change the future? Because we need to look, what can African government do? Okay, we know what what's happening? What can we do immediately right now?
Well, if I see any government official, the first thing is for them to allow leaders, young people, to take leadership positions. Also, too, the green curriculum, for instance, or the environmental education curriculum, or environmental for sustainable development curriculum, should start from early childhood. That's like one of the things I mentioned. As much as, like, let me give you an example, my own personal example. I've been talking about going green and the old green campus initiative across campus, and we've been educating youth on the idea of sustainability. And I went to Qatar like a couple of times, and I went to teach some couple of students about sustainability. Guess what? 3 days ago, I had another webinar with the students in Qatar. And after my presentation, what they said was like, oh, Dr. Adenike, we have Green Ambassadors program in Qatar now. We have a lot of green initiatives, eco school programs, and these are inspired by when you come and give us a lecture. So, some of the students, after they just hear a lecture about, going green or eco school or something, they go to the government, or they go to some leader in their community, and they just share the idea. And before you know it, the government is funding those initiatives. They're implementing it. It's actually in the budget. In Qatar, they have green initiatives. It's education accounts for about 2% of the GDP. So it's in the budget. So like this kind of initiatives should be in the budget of the government, and they should enable youth. It's not just like for people like us, we'll be talking about this going green for a long time. Is the government listening? Not necessarily. It's when we go to other countries that they will now they understand what we're saying, or they appreciate us more. So but what I want to say now is that the government is not, I'm tired of talking about the government. I don't feel that the government, they should do whatever they have to do. But I feel like as individuals, since we've talked and we have not seen any changes, to be honest, I think as individuals in our local communities, which is what I am doing with the Green Institute in Ondo, is that in my own capacity as an educator, what am I doing? I'm educating young people, and hopefully my goal is that by the time they graduate, they go on into the world, and whatever they've learned from our own program, it creates some kind of like ripple effect. So they go to businesses, to governance, and they translate that into action, into sustainable actions. So as much as we want the government to do something, I feel like even on an individual level, we should do the little that we can. Hopefully, where all of us are doing it, maybe there will be a change.
Yes, I agree with you. Before I go to Olalekan, I just want to also agree that we just look at government at one sector. There's also the private sector. There's also a big polluter, of course, and also an opportunity that can make a difference a lot in terms of that, investing in education as well, investing in green jobs and the rest of them. So I think that's great. So we don't have to look at just only government, but individually, what are we doing to contribute to that part? So I think that's a good point, because I was just thinking about myself, like, oh gosh, yeah, individually we have to do something, but that's not enough. So everyone have to come together to do that. So I'm going to move to Olalekan. Olalekan, just give you a picture. I know you're also an entrepreneur. You worked a lot on environment issues. Let's look at plastic pollution, for example, which is very quite toxic in our world today. So from plastic pollution to poor air quality, what is the way forward for African continent? What can we do? I mean, we buy poly bags, polythene everywhere we do. That all of this thing is contributing to a very, very toxic African community, the African environment. So, so how do we control this kind of toxicity in our environment?
So we are where we are today. The only thing we can do about it now is to deal with where we are today. And dealing with it is by, as Adenike mentioned earlier, by educating our population in Africa on climate change and the effect of it, the ripple effect of it. And also, talking about climate change, we need to train people and educate people about the 3 R's, the reduce, reuse, and recycle, which is very important. So when you are training people about this, what is the alternative? What are the incentives? And also the private sector, they have a role to play, as we mentioned earlier. For example, in Germany, you take your bottled water and everything. When you are going groceries the next time, you pack your plastic, you get some refund based on that. So until we start seeing these initiatives, people will be passionate, and people will be more intentional, about reducing this particular stuff. For example, in the United States, as you know, if you are traveling, across the United States, you are not allowed to park your car by the roadside, and probably you want to wee on the roadside and stuff like that. That is destroying the land. It's also polluting the air. Something as little as that. So what facilities, what infrastructures are the government putting in place, for us to get this done? So in as much as we want to take this out of the government to see what we can do about it as individuals, but it is important to know that, individuals cannot do it alone. It's also important to know that the government cannot do it alone. I think there should be incentive about this. And I'm talking about the incentives. We should actually look at how we can mobilize the rural communities. It is very important that we mobilize these people to understand the effect of climate change. For example, we have no idea of the rate of tree felling in the rural areas. I was opportune to work in the northern part of the country, Nasarawa to be precise. I saw the rate of tree felling where trees are being converted to charcoal, and they are doing it in such a way that, half of the tree actually goes to, destroying the climate change, and half came out as charcoal, and the charcoal goes into the city, for gas and everything. So there should be an alternative. That happens to be the, what am I saying? That happens to be the cheapest means of fuel for the rural people. So if we are getting this away from them, what are we giving them in return? So, there should be incentives about, getting this.
I agree with you. So I'm going to come back to you that there should indeed be incentives as well. But if you look at plastic pollution, everyone is using plastic. And incentive would be providing a venue where people can actually properly dispose that plastics, right? But does that incentive use? But beyond that, if you give them those resources, this infrastructure, like bin, would they be able to know how to properly dispose of those plastics, or just leave them and throw them anyway? So I think this is what I wanted to see. How do we manage that? Because that makes our environment dirty, makes our environment very toxic, because a child can pick that in and eat it, and then it becomes a problem. In the oceans, all the plastic in our oceans are killing our natural resource in that part. Nigeria, Lagos, we're also surrounded by water. So what can we really do in terms of just not do incentive and education? What the first thing that we can tell, like, Minister, to address plastic pollution, this is what we should do? Like, just give me 2 points before I go to the next question to Adenike.
So yeah, number one, the reward system. So if you know that you're going to have a reward for this plastic you are disposing, then you guide it jealously. And the fact that poverty is a thing in Africa, and people are looking for a way to reduce their cost and get more resources to get stuff done, then that is done. Then properly disposing them as well. Waste separation, it's also very important. Where people are aware that you need to separate your reusable waste, from your kitchen waste and stuff like that. And I think the government there should be a system. I think system is important, whereby your kitchen waste is collected separately, and your reusables is also and your recycles are collected separately. So that has to be in place for people to be able to separate their waste. I think that those are the two things I would like the government to do.
Reward system, because looking at how the poverty issue, that reward system can be an exchange where a family can exchange the plastics to having their girl child go to school. So that's great things. Thank you for noting that. I'm going to go to Adenike, but I don't think we have time. Adenike, just very, very quick question that I'm trying to see what we can do. Let's go back to the whole entire context of climate and African continent. Like I said before, we're having two crises: the COVID crisis and the climate crisis. So, what are the factors that have contributed to Africa's high vulnerability to climate, and what can we do? We were dealing with climate before, and now suddenly we're dealing with COVID. So, how do we do? Because I know COVID, now we're trying to recover from that and kickstart our growth anymore. Is that an opportunity for Africa? Is COVID an opportunity for Africa to address climate change? You're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Well, there's been a lot of I want to take the coastal region of Ondo State, Nigeria, or the coastal regions of Nigeria as an example. because it throws a lot of light into poverty and vulnerability, because we're talking about like seasonal changes that is affecting planting operations, which is like one of the main occupations of the people in those regions. And when they fail to reap bountiful harvests, their livelihood and economic output is threatened. On a global scale, you can say that COVID-19 has kind of helped in terms of marine pollution or ocean pollution, or pollution generally, because during the COVID pandemic, we had less people traveling. We saw like a decrease in the greenhouse gas emissions. But locally in Nigeria, I really don't see the effect, because just last week I traveled to, like I said, to the coastal regions, and the place is still the same. In fact, just about a few weeks ago, there was a sea surge that happened in a community called Ayetoro, which destroyed more than 2,000 building structures and claimed more than 85% of their land. And this is crazy, because now a lot of women and children are more exposed and they're prone to infectious diseases. So in a local context, I don't see the positivity that the pandemic has done, because the effects of this climate crisis are still there. It still doesn't change anything. If you still go to those regions, they still see a lot of waste in the ocean, in the water bodies, everywhere. For instance, in that Ayetoro community, the community palace was submerged in water, and it was like completely destroyed. A lot of people, about 2,000 people, lost their homes and everything. And same thing in Ghana, about 2.2 million people depend on fishing for their livelihoods. And with climate change now, you see like rise in water temperature, you see rise in ocean acidification, which damages like the physiology of the fish species, including their size and their reproductive capacity. So if they are not able to reproduce, then that means we have less market value. And that means that most of these farmers or most of these people will not be able to, when it comes to fish farming, they won't be able to have fish for economic activities. For instance, I was even made to know that there's a species of fish that is called Sardinella fish, and that is really, really abundant in Senegalese, but now it has gone into extinct. So I think the only thing that we can learn from pandemic in terms of, if we are looking at it from a local context, is that, some things can wait, because I think this is a time that a lot of people, we had the chance to sit at home and reflect. So we can say that our leaders, during the pandemic, there was no elite, or there's no rich people, or there's no poor people. It affected everybody. Everybody had to stay home. So it would put the same mentality into climate crisis or climate change. That's okay. No, this climate change, even though we have other people that are more vulnerable because of especially rural communities, at the end of the day, it's still going to affect us all. So we need to do our own part, like Sipasi said, even if it's just simple thing as just disposing your waste properly, simple thing as switching off your lights when you're not using it, even though, well, that's kind of debatable because we don't have 24 hours lights in Nigeria. So I don't know how we're really contributing to emissions. But yeah, but you get what I mean. What I'm just saying is what we can learn though, and even in foreign societies, everybody's going digital, like this conference, you're having it virtually. But that's why I say I don't see the effects, because in Nigerian societies, even public schools, right now, in the school I'm teaching, they wanted us to do like virtual learning for our students. It didn't work out, because most of these kids in rural communities don't have access to internet. It's not like they can't have access to it, they can't buy data. So at the end of the day, you're hosting a virtual class, you only have like 1 or 2 students in the class. It's only private school kids that are able to use internet and use data to access virtual. So I don't see, on a local perspective, I don't see the effect of COVID-19, other than it's a wake-up call that whatever happens in Ayetoro, in a village in Ayetoro, can affect somebody that is in Lagos. That we're in like a global, we're all on the same global umbrella. So we shouldn't be saying things like, "Oh, it's not my business," until it becomes our business.
I'm just going to follow up on what you just said, because I noticed you've actually excellently given us a picture about the really impact of climate change, especially from coastal areas, the whole community that in coastal areas, because our coastal areas most times are mostly rural communities. They've talked about the loss of the economic loss. So I keep thinking, we've discussed this a lot about climate finance finance, and also in terms of recovering from COVID, talk about finance as well. So what can government really do in terms of like people have lost the economic opportunity because of the impact of climate change? How do they adapt with access to finance that can help them grow the economy? For example, if I can't fish anymore because of climate change, what else can I do to raise money to send the kids to school? And then what are the, Olalekan can also, come in here if you want to. What are the things that our young people can learn, can build a capacity as an entrepreneur to get some money too? Because let's talk about it, money is important. Money is important right now. And then COVID has even made it even more important was that money, because when you don't have a job because of COVID, you've lost some earnings. So just give me a picture, and then please also put some recommendations that our leaders can take here. So Adenike, you and then Olalekan, any of you can come in here.
All right, great. That's an excellent question, Esther, because what I see that our youth can do or people can do is agriculture, really climate smart agriculture. People no matter whether it's pandemic or whatever it is, people have to eat, right? So I feel like the government have to invest in a lot of agriculture. Youths have to start seeing agriculture from an innovative, not just like some kind of dirty job, but they need to start seeing a lot of innovative things that they can do with agriculture. Also, the Nigerian government can learn from Rwanda. Rwanda has something they call the Green Fund, and it's the largest of its kind in Africa. And what that Green Fund does is it supports public and private projects that can have a potential for transformative change and supports Rwanda commitment to green economy. So if we have that kind of fund, then we can have young people come up with social projects. Projects or businesses that solve social issues. If you give young people incentives, they'll be willing to think outside the box, and they would want to become entrepreneurs. And by becoming entrepreneurs, they also will employ more people. So if we can have some kind of green fund, for instance, that will create like a climate resilience and a local carbon economy. Another example that in Africa that someone is doing is Morocco. Morocco has built the largest concentrated solar facility. And their goal is that they want to achieve 52% of its energy by mix by 2030. And what Morocco is doing that we can learn from is that they also offer trainings for women and young people to teach them about solar, how to make their own solar panels. They taught them how they can use solar for climate smart agriculture. And in doing that, they're prioritizing women and young people in decision making and even in governance. So, in terms of government, that's what they can do.
I'm taking note of that. I'm going to Olalekan because I think we have less than 3 minutes to wrap up the session. So, Olalekan, please, let's get your point.
Yeah, I would just like to stress what Adenike said about agriculture. It is important to know that agriculture contributes huge to climate change, depletion of the ozone layer due to the heavy machineries, the processing process and stuff like that. So I think it's high time we encourage home gardening in Africa. It really reduces the footprint of climate change a lot. So for example, here in the United States, you can see how people are going into home garden, backyard garden. It is very important where people have clean, green, and ethical food to eat. Clean, green, and healthy food to eat, which is very important. But imagine if you live in Lagos, where your food comes from, the bad road and everything, before your food gets to Lagos, they're deteriorated. So, when you have your garden, you have access to clean food, you reduce your print on the ozone layer and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the ways to go. And in Protect Ozone, we actually innovated the 50% water saving irrigation kits, whereby you just have to put your water, about 40 liters of water. You don't need to go back to your farm for about 1 week. These are things that could actually make youth interested in agriculture more, whereby you produce more food, but in an innovative way, thereby reducing the footprint in the world. Yeah.
I just when I heard you talk about home gardening, just reminding me of my childhood, going out in Calabar, and my mom used to plant the tomatoes in the backyard and the Sandy River. You just go and pluck it and then you cook. And that really give you that culture of being very close to the environment. And I think for me, that really shaped my work, just be able to have your food from where what you invested in, from farming, gardening, and the rest of them too. So I think that's interesting. So just to recap, because I have like just 2 minutes, this has been an interesting session. I've learned a lot from you guys. So for those who are just joining us, we've been talking about toxic environment and what the role of African government, and we've identified that the first thing first beginning with education, all right? Education and awareness about this issue, not just within the urban centers, but also in rural areas, in a setting where poverty is making climate change even more worse. And then plus adding COVID, making people lose their jobs and losing their livelihood. So that, and then we've talked about how government can actually really deliberately invest in education, not just government, private sector as well, because private sector is one of the biggest employer of labor. And but government have to make that an enabling environment for private sector to do that. And then of course, all of us as individuals have a role to play in our individual way of living, and helping each other and supporting each other. Like these amazing panelists who are doing something on their own to contribute to a better Nigeria and a better Africa. We've also learned that with climate change comes issue of economic loss, and then we talk like Africa is a youthful population, and because of that, we need to find a way of making sure that our young people have the resources to be able to make a difference. And then NK have recommended us having a youth green fund, like what we can learn from Rwanda and Morocco as well in terms of renewable energy. And we've also heard about the issue of reward system to manage plastic pollution in Africa, which is very, very key, because when you have an incentive, people can really do better, because this is how our world is now. And then lastly, Africa is blessed. That's the thing I didn't say. We are blessed in two advantages. We have young people who are industrious. We also have young people who will not give up on the continent. So thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much for those who've joined us online. This has been an incredible session, and we have to keep talking, keep engaging, keep holding our government accountable as we move forward. So thank you so much, Adenike, and thank you so much, Olalekan, for joining this platform.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
All right, guys. Bye.